everyone to the ADDIE Courses Academy workshop. My name is Tandi Vaughn, and today I'm going to be presenting about explicit instructional model and instructional design. So happy Friday, and I'm so glad to be here today. Let me just double check. I hope you all can hear me. Let's see. One second, just want to make sure I'm looking in the chat. Great, wonderful. Okay. Sorry, I'm trying to move the things off the screen. There we go. Okay, so today I just want to show you all 4 reasons why you are more than qualified to transfer your teaching experience to the corporate setting. So a lot of times, so this workshop is really for teachers who are trying to transition into instructional design. I know when I was exploring the idea of going into corporate, quite a few people told me that it will probably be difficult as a teacher to transition into this field. And it was somewhat intimidating for me when I began to start the process of interviewing. And before I started interviewing, I was looking at the different instructional design principles and models. And for me, in order to fully understand it, I have to figure out how to relate it to what I was currently doing. And so during my interview, I did not downplay my teaching experience. I talked about it and I just gave them examples of how my skills were transferable. So today I just want to show you 4 reasons why you are more than qualified to transfer your teaching experience to the corporate setting. So let's go ahead and get started. If you have any questions, I will stop periodically to check the chat box. So our overview today is I'm going to talk a little bit about what is the explicit instructional model, what are some examples of the explicit instructional model. We're going to touch a little bit on pedagogy versus andragogy, components of Gagne's 9 events of instruction, components of ADDIE, components of action mapping, and I'm just going to provide you a brief description of the SAM model. And so this topic, I can talk about it for hours. So there's a few slides where I feel like I put a whole lot of content into one slide. So I apologize, but I'm going to try not to take up too much of your time. So what is the explicit instructional model? So explicit instruction is a research-proven instructional model that provides structured and direct academic instruction to students. So every teacher uses this model. So some districts have different names for this model. And I apologize, I didn't go back and give you a brief introduction of me. So I was a teacher for over 15 years. I started out in 2002 as an assistant pre-K teacher. And after I graduated college, I went into social work. So I was a social services case manager. And then I decided to do the teacher alternative preparation program in a district called Clayton County in the outskirts of Atlanta. And I was a teacher there for about 7 years. I taught 1st and 4th grade. And then I went on to Corpus Christi, Texas, where I was a education consultant and grant project director. And then I decided to be an instructional designer / instructional technology specialist for a school district in Georgia called DeKalb County. I did that for a year, and then I decided to become a teacher in Gwinnett County Public Schools, which is in Georgia as well. And there I took on the role as a 5th grade teacher. And then the last 3 years there, I was a E-class lead innovator, in which I trained the school on how to use the learning management system. and I was also a grade level chairperson for the EIP program. And then last year, my husband and my family, we relocated to Dallas, Texas, and my husband told me that moving to Dallas would be a great way to leave education since there are so many headquarters here. And so that's how I got into corporate instructional design. And I somehow stumbled upon during my research, I stumbled on Dr. Robin Sargent's IDDIE Courses Academy, and I joined June of 2019, and I just dived into the course and just grabbed everything that I need to help me to apply to start getting jobs. Okay, so back to the explicit instructional model. So this is a model that almost every teacher uses. Some districts have different names for it. And so in the chat box, as I go on to explain what exactly it is, you may say, oh yeah, this is what we use, but it's referred to, we call it a different name. So just put the type of the name that you guys refer to it in the chat box for me. Okay, so what is instructional design? Instructional design is the systematic development of, let me move my screen up, of instructional specifications using learning and instructional theories to ensure the quality of education. So it is the entire process of analysis of learning needs, goals, and the development of a delivery system to meet the needs of the learner. Sounds very similar to education, right? So this is what we all want to know. What does the instructional model look like? So the instructional model, and I'm just going to give you a brief kind of visual picture of what it looked like in my classroom. And when I was a consultant for the state in Texas, when I would do observations in K-8 classrooms, public school classrooms, these are some of the components I would look for. I would look for the exact same components that I was using when I was a classroom teacher. So we all know that when we start a lesson, we start our lesson by activating prior knowledge. So you want to do a quick questionnaire asking your students, what do you remember from our prior lesson? The next step would be provide an attention tactic to hook the learner attention to the lesson. So you may start off with using some type of graphic media, such as an image or a video, or you may even read your students a book to kind of get them to anticipate what's going to happen throughout your lesson. So you're hooking their attention. The next part is you're directly explaining the expectations of the lesson, such as the assessment tools, the essential questions, the objectives, and vocabulary. And then the next part is you're modeling the lesson skills of focus. And so that was my favorite part of teaching, is modeling. So my students knew when I was modeling, they could not ask questions. That was my time to show them my expectations. So we have these huge expectations for our students, but they can't meet that if they don't know, if they don't have any expectations. So you're modeling that skill, whether you're teaching your students how to regroup in subtraction. So you may have some manipulative, some 1s and 10s units to help them with that, or perhaps you're modeling how to find a main idea of a passage. So that is the component, that's one component of the explicit instructional model. And then you move on into guided practice. That's the we do section, in which you are providing those students that opportunity to apply those skills that you just modeled for them. And that can be whole group, where you all do it together, or you give them a few minutes to work with a partner, and you're walking around your room, or you're putting them in breakout rooms and listening to them have those discussions, and you're providing them with that feedback. The next portion is independent practice. That's the section where you allow your students to have time to think through the process. And then you move into what we call is small groups or differentiated instruction. That's where you are working with a small group of students, and you're working with them based on their skill level or providing them with resources based on their needs. So in my classroom, I try to keep my groups at least 3 or 4. So I may have had a group, say for example, I provided a test on a particular standard, and I noticed that maybe a small percentage of my students had a difficult time with that. So based on my data, I may have had a below level group, an on level group, and an above level group. So in that first group, I'm working on a particular standard. I have different resources, maybe some manipulatives to give them more of that hands-on experience and providing them with feedback. Also, for the on-level group, they may have the same standard or a different standard, and we're using resources that may look somewhat a little bit different from the below-level group. And then you have your high-level group. And so you're just meeting the students where they are, but you're using different resources. And the last part is you're providing a summary of learning objectives and assessment of learning to drive instruction, because we know data drives instruction. So you want to make sure that your students know exactly, well, you want to know exactly what your students know. And so from that assessment, you're using that data and you're starting this entire process all over again. And so that was the basis of me creating a lesson plan. And here's an example of a lesson plan from a previous school district that I taught in. I took a portion of it out and kind of made it my own, but this is how I would plan. So I have my direct explanation. So I'm providing a brief introduction, I'm providing vocabulary, the hook, and then I move on into the modeling. That's the I do, the guided practice we do, and the independent practice and differentiated instruction and assessment and reflection. So Dr. Robin Sargent and I decided instead of creating a workbook, I'll find out for sure. I believe we're going to provide you with a PDF version of this presentation so that you can use it and refer back to it when you need it. So that is an example of the explicit instructional model. And so today we're going to focus on, of course, I just gave you the explicit instructional model, Gagne's 9 events of instruction, the ADDIE model, and action mapping. And so let's take a look at pedagogy versus andragogy. And so we know as teachers, I like to use the word educators because we're so much more than teachers. And even though I'm no longer in the classroom, I will always be an educator. That is my passion. And I have 2 small children of my own, so I'm teaching at home as well. So pedagogy is the art and science of teaching children. So the teacher determines the what, the how, the when, and where students will learn. So we really don't provide them with a lot of autonomy, just somewhat, all depends on how you run your classroom, but we determine how, what, when, and where we teach our students, of course, based off using data. Now, andragogy is the method and practice of teaching adult learners. So when you begin to start interviewing for your corporate instructional design role or your higher ed or nonprofit, they want to know, okay, yes, you are a teacher. You are, quote unquote, the master of teaching children. But how do these skills transfer over into teaching adults? And so we all know that adult learners come with a higher level of knowledge and experience. So these differences in learners determine which strategies will be used to instruct and facilitate learning. And so the next few slides, I'm going to provide you with side-by-side examples of how your teaching skills transfer over into teaching adults. So before we go into that, let's see if I have any questions. So I'm in the chat. Yep, workshop model. Yep, you're right, Robin. That is a typical day in the life of a teacher. Okay, Thanks, guys. So let me move my screen back up. So here I have Gagne's 9 events of instruction. So I'm not going to read this slide because I have it in the next slide, but all of these resources can be located. The instructional design models and principles are located inside the ADDIE Courses Academy. So here's the Gagne's 9 events of instruction. So on the left side, I have the 9 events. And then on the right side, I have how it's transferred, how it applies in teaching, explicit instructional model, whether you're teaching pre-K all the way through high school. And so this model truly helped me to really explain how my skills are transferable. And I must say, now that most corporations are working remote, you can't see it, but on my wall, I have all of Robin's resources from the ADDIE Academy, including the ADDIE principles on my wall. So as I was interviewing, I was referring back to those principles. And I studied psychology in undergrad, and of course I have my master's and specialist in instructional design, but some days I forget, and some days I can talk for hours about the different models, and then some days I'm like, wait a minute, I'm confusing myself. But anyway, so here is a prime example of how when you go on that interview or you are already on that job, you have the tools. You have the tools to help you transfer over your skills to corporate ID. So for example, Gagne's 9 events of instruction, number 1, get attention. That is the same as setting the hook for your lesson. Number 2, present objectives. There, you're just simply stating your objectives and essential questions. And number 3, you're stimulating recall of prior learning. If we remember from the explicit instructional model, we're just simply activating prior knowledge. Whether you're using an anticipation guide or you're reviewing vocabulary or reviewing a prior lesson. And present stimulus, same as content materials. Providing guidance, you're modeling. Number 6, elicit performance. You're simply providing that component of guided practice. Number 7, provide feedback. So in your differentiated instruction or throughout your instruction, you're providing those students with that feedback to get them to the level that you want them to be. Number 8, assessing performance. So in a classroom, we typically provide assessments, whether it's informal or formal assessments. You're providing some type of assessments, whether they're writing in a journal, whether you're simply seeing how many hands are raised, or whether you are looking at, if you're teaching online, you're looking at your discussion threads. And retention and transfer. So that's pretty much the summary portion. And so those are Gagne's 9 events of instruction. And as educators, we all share the same goal. And the same goal is that we want our students to reach their maximum learning potential. So when we're creating our lesson plans, we're not thinking, oh, let me just hurry up and write this lesson plan and get over. We have an idea in mind of what we want our students to learn and how we want our students to learn. Now, there are times when you're teaching and you realize this lesson that you spent hours on did not go according to the way that you had planned. I know that happened to me several times. I made up this wonderful lesson and my students were looking at me like, what are you talking about? And so I had to stop in the middle of that lesson and restructure how I was going to continue on with that lesson. Okay, so let's look at another example because I can yap all day. The ADDIE model. Now, I must say, if you don't learn any model, learn the ADDIE model. Every job description I see, well, not every, but at least 98% of the job descriptions have the question of, do you know the ADDIE model? Or you must know the ADDIE model. And so let's look and see how this is transferable in education. So we have here analysis. So for educators, that's simply using student data to determine instructional needs and tasks. So what are those instructional needs? Maybe you're focusing on one particular standard. The student must know how to add 2-digit numbers by a particular date. And so you're looking at their strengths and their weaknesses. You're also looking at where they are. Okay, and so you're determining the needs of your students. And if you're in corporate, you're determining the needs of that particular department that you're training. So you're looking at the number of employees you're going to be training, the amount of time, what is the deadline, what is the time frame, what are the resources that you will need. So all of that is the analysis. And that's pretty much the same for if you're a teacher. And so the next part of this cycle is design. So this is where you're writing learning objectives, activities, and worksheets. And that's what I do in my role. During this phase, I am writing out my objectives based off of my analysis. And the next part is development. So that's when you create course materials or you are creating that lesson plan. You have all of those components now. You identified your needs, you identified the standards, the objectives, you know what type of resources you want. So now you are able to sit down and write out that lesson plan, or if you are already an ID, you're able to sit and write out that training plan or build that course. And so the next component is implementation. So simply that is teaching and utilizing the resources. So there in this phase, you're either teaching that e-learning course or you're teaching your class. And then the last part is evaluation. So that's when you have the data and you're evaluating it. And so in corporate ID, this is the part where I'm looking at, wow, did I get the feedback that I needed? I'm looking at behaviors. I'm looking at how those employees are improving based off of my course or my training. And that's as a teacher, this is where you're looking at, okay, did all of my students meet? Or did they fall below? And then this process starts all over again. Okay, and my last one is action mapping, and I hope I'm not moving too fast for you guys. So action mapping, that is by Kathy Moore, and so here you see, so we see the arrows going this way, going towards the right. So you have necessary information, practice, activity for actions, actions needed to reach goal, and business change. Well, we all know, this reminds me of the backwards design model. And so as teachers, this is what we do. We all know we cannot begin to start planning our lessons unless we have the assessment, unless we have that goal in mind and the assessment. So it's pretty much impossible to start teaching a lesson and you haven't seen the assessment. You don't know what standard you're going to be teaching or what questions are going to be on that assessment. And that's not necessarily teaching to the test, but you need to have some type of example of what you want your students to learn. And so it's transferable into any instructional design role. So on the left side is the action mapping, and on the right side is how it is transferred as a teacher. So necessary information. When I think of necessary information, and this is what helped me to yap in my interviews, is I'm able to activate prior knowledge, and I've modeled and I had course materials. Practice activity for actions. In the classroom, that looked like guided and independent practice. Okay? And the action needed to reach your goal. That's your differentiated instruction. How are you going to reach your goal? So as educators, we know that whole group instruction is difficult. You know, they do not retain as much information as if they do when they're in a small group. So in a small group, they're doing application, they're listening, they're seeing, they're having an opportunity to collaborate with others. So they have a higher chance of reaching that goal. And so in corporate, the overall goal, that's the business change. So before we start creating any type of resources or e-learning courses or training, we identify what would that business change look like? What do we want changed? So that's your overall goal. And so for teachers, our overall goal is increase test scores and improve behavior. And when I mean by improved behavior, I don't mean whether the student was good or bad. I mean as far as, did you notice that that student is more motivated to participate in class, to complete assignments? Did you see that light bulb click on? I think that's the best part of teaching, when you see that light bulb click on. But believe it or not, even though you're teaching adults in corporate or higher ed or nonprofit, you love it. You will love it when you see your participants, those light bulbs click on. That lets you know that they have your undivided attention, and the skills that you're providing them, they're going to go back and apply that to their work environment. Okay, so this is the slide I was talking about. It's pretty lengthy, and I apologize for that. But before I do that, let me see if there's any questions in the chat. Love this correlation. It makes it so much easier to understand. Thank you, Kelly. And the parallels are absolutely astounding. Just when I was starting to think I couldn't do this. And that's what Dr. Robin Sargent and I were discussing. I just honestly felt like this, if I could only just reach out to one teacher, I really felt like this would be so helpful. And believe it or not, like I told you, even I studied psychology and I, got 2 different degrees, it's still, you can read a textbook all day long. But when it's time to put that in, in action, you really have to see, how does it pertain to me? How can I make this transferable to that actual interview or job? And so I was hoping and praying that I was able to break it down somewhat for you all. Okay, so let me go back to the SAM model. And I'll be honest with you, this is one of my favorite models. And it just became my favorite model probably a few months ago. Now, when I started the ADDIE Academy, I don't recall learning the SAM model through my programs. And when I started the ADDIE Academy, I focused on Gagne, ADDIE, Dick and Carey. Look, I'm looking up on my screen. And the Kirkpatrick model for evaluation. And somehow I skipped over this. And I believe I skipped over it because of Successive Approximation model. Looking at it, to me, it just looked like it had so much information on it that I didn't take the time to read it through because I was intimidated. And that's not good, because in this field, we have to continuously learn, continuously challenge ourselves. And I don't know why I let this model intimidate me. But anyways, I'm going to move on, and I'm going to go back to that lengthy slide, and I apologize. But with the SAM model, you'll see a lot of iteration. So iteration is the repetition of a process in order to generate an outcome. So I'm going to refer back and forth to this slide as I read each section. So here you have the preparation section, the iterative design. I hope I'm pronouncing it right. I hear so many different pronunciations. And the iterative development. Okay, so let's look at the preparation phase. And I know I have bullet points. It drives me crazy when people have so many words on the bullet point, but I did it today and I apologize. So the preparation phase, in comparison to the ADDIE model, which we all know, most of us know by now, we're still learning, trying to get comfortable with it. In comparison to the ADDIE model, which begins with the analysis phase, SAM begins with what's called the preparation phase. So this phase is employed to collect background information on learners such as strengths and weaknesses to establish the goal of a project. And that's what educators do. We don't just jump into a lesson not knowing what our students know or not. We have some type of information. I don't care, even if it's the first week of school. You have data from the previous school years. You may have data just from a quick informal survey from your students, or a quick morning work questions on the board. That's your data. You're using that to prepare your lessons throughout the day. The next bullet is the preparation phase concludes with the Savvy start. So the Savvy is a rotating brainstorming session in which prototypes are developed. And I believe a few days ago, Dr. Sargent had a post about the SAM model. And so when I saw that, I said, oh gosh, I need to put that in there, because I've been getting quite a few inboxes about questions about the SAM model. And so I was like, well, maybe I can break it down for some people, how I broke it down for me. So let's go back to, there we go. So that's the background, that's the preparation. So here you're gathering that information, and then you're moving on to you're concluding with the Savvy start. So now we're moving to the iterative design. And so in this phase, in this design phase, the team is narrowed down to subject matter experts and your instructional designers or developers. And so I'm just reading from here. So this phase consists of project planning and additional designing. So the project planning phase should always take place after the Savvy start and consist of setting project timelines, budgets, time and money, and the assigning of a task that needs to be completed. Sounds very similar to education. And once the project planning is complete, the team can now move forward with additional design. Okay, and so let me go back to the previous slide so you can see that. And so in the SAM model, you're rotating through this process 3 times. And so let's move to iterative development phase. So once the team has agreed upon the project goals, then it moves into a constant loop of developing, implementing, and evaluating. Sounds familiar? We're developing our lesson plans, we're teaching the lessons and providing the assessments at the same time. And then we get that data and we're evaluating. And what do we do once we get that data? Instead of that lesson that is highlighted on that pacing guide or that scope and sequence that the school district provided for you, you have to go back and restructure your lesson to make sure that you hit on those skills that those students did not quite retain or grasp. So it is important within this phase to develop smaller chunks of the completed project to ensure you always have something usable for the end user to provide feedback on. And unlike ADDIE, which waits until the end of the project to receive feedback, SAM always has something usable that learners can use and interact with at all stages of development. So I'm not sure if it was a few weeks ago, but I remember reading something in the IDOS Academy on how someone mentioned that one of their colleagues created an e-learning or a video, start to finish, spent all this time, all weekend long on it, only for his supervisors to say that was not what they were looking for. And so with the SAM model, you have the stakeholders, the subject matters, everybody's hand is in it. Everybody is aware where you are in the process, what's working and what's not working. And with the SAM model, this model is ideal when you're working with a team, not typically just one person. So you wouldn't, and Dr. Robin Sargent, correct me if I'm wrong, but you wouldn't use this model if it was just you. If you're the developer, subject matter expert, if you're just that one person team. Now, unlike ADDIE, which waits until the end of the project to receive feedback, SAM always has something usable for the learners to use and interact with all stages of development. And typically when I'm building out an e-learning course or a video, I provide my manager with a my storyboard. And as I am creating, he'll go back and say, let me see where you are in the process. And it's been quite a few times, a lot of times, and he's like, no, let's go with a different design. So I'm having to start somewhere in the middle, but never over. So regardless of which strategy you're using, always make sure you keep your manager and your team in the loop. And the last part, which is here, the design, proof, alpha, and beta. So the alpha, beta, go, release. So the alpha phase serves as the first version of a fully completed project. And so you remember right here I said the first version. So that means it's going to change a few times. With the beta phase, that's a modified version of the alpha phase based on the feedback and final review. So it serves as a final opportunity to review and fix the project based on the feedback from the alpha phase. And so finally, once final corrections have been made, the project moves into the go release and is ready for full deployment. So this is a great opportunity if you were figuring out how could you create an instructional design document that shows mastery in a particular ADDIE model. This would be a great one to use. And so this was my little bonus model. I just wanted to show you in comparison to ADDIE how this one I think is somewhat more effective, because with ADDIE you're kind of figuring out, did this work at the very end? But with the SAM model, I mean, it's a constant rotation. You're looking at the design, what works, what does not work, and finally you're able to get to that go release. Now, typically with the alpha phase, that's where you may find very few errors in there. But if you do, the beta phase, you'll be able to scrub out all of those errors. So this is pretty much it, but this was my purpose, was to show you all, do not give up with instructional design. And one of the reasons why I decided to get into instructional design, well, when I first started teaching, I was in my master's program, and a lot of the things that I was creating, I was implementing in the classroom as well. And I would find myself getting lost in creating things, whether it was creating workshops for the districts that I was teaching, or whether it was creating resources for the classroom. That was so fun. So like when I'm sitting down on the weekends when my kids are occupied, I get lost in time because I'm sitting here creating, and I call creating playtime. And so I just really want you all to understand that you are teachers, and when you get that phone interview or that face-to-face interview, you can be able to go into that interview sitting up straight with confidence, and you'll be able to verbally express and go on and on and on how you have those transferable skills. Now, here, teachers can Analyze learning needs. Not can, you are. You're analyzing those learning needs. You do that every day. You do it so much that you don't even realize you're doing it. You're planning for instruction. You're in time. And within that planning time, you're looking at budget. We all know educators come out of their pockets. And not only that, your principal is providing you with a budget of what resources you can order for your team. You're also looking at the deadlines or the pacing guide. And you're looking at how many learners you're teaching. And this transfers over to corporate. You need to know how many learners you're teaching, what is the deadline, and what is the budget. What resources are they going to provide or you can purchase for this training or e-learning course. And teachers collect data. That is number one with our job. We all know that numbers rule everything. At the end of the year, your principals are looking at what percentage of students in which classrooms have exceeded on the state standardized test. I mean, data rules everything. I've seen teachers be moved around because of their data. I was guilty of that when I first started teaching. My scores were so low, but that taught me, look at the data as I'm planning. Write learning objectives in curriculum. You write learning objectives every time you create a lesson plan or when you put that learning objective on a board. That tells me or your principal that you took the time to think about what you were going to teach and what your students need to know. Also, some teachers volunteer with their school districts and they help to write the curriculum. That is resume worthy. That should go on, and I'm sorry, I have curriculum misspelled, but that should go on your resume. And when you're in that interview, yes, I am capable of writing learning objectives in curriculum. That's what I do on a day-to-day basis. Also, teachers design assessments. You design assessments. Whether you went on teacherspayteachers.com and downloaded an assessment, or whether your grade level provided you with an assessment or the district provided you with assessments, sometimes you change the assessments to match the needs of your students in your classroom. That's designing an assessment. Selecting instructional methods, whether you're going to teach whole group, whether you're going to do differentiated instruction, whether you're going to flip your classroom or do a blended learning, a lot of teachers did that last spring when you had to just at the drop of a dime move all of your instruction to online instruction. And this segues into creating modules in a learning management system. Yes, a lot of times with the learning management system, whether you're using Brightspace, It's Learning, Google Classroom, or Canvas, a lot of times the school districts do provide modules for you in the learning management system, but there's times when you're able to create resources or different modules for your students. Highlight that, place that on your resume. Develop materials, whether you're creating center activities or anchor charts. And if you're teaching online, those anchor charts are infographics. And the last part is evaluating the effectiveness of your lesson. All teachers do self-reflection. We're looking at how effective were we? We look at the impact. How many of our students mastered the standard and can move on to the next standard? And you're also looking at the behavior. Did it motivate your students to do more? Is that light bulb clicking on? And so when you go into that interview, tell them all of those bullets. This is what you're doing. You are doing all of those, whether you were a PE teacher, an art teacher, an elementary, middle school, high school. You're a teacher. You're an educator. You are not just educating your students on the academic standards, you're teaching them about life skills. And so when someone tells you that it's going to be extremely difficult for you to get into corporate, I want you to keep this in mind. This is what my husband told me. He said, educators set the foundation. If it wasn't for us, half these people would not have jobs. A lawyer had to go to school, an instructional designer, a principal, they all had to start somewhere. And that somewhere was in education, in school, pre-K or kindergarten. So you are more than capable of getting into corporate. Now, I do want to leave, this is my last tip, I do want to leave something with you. When I first started in education, like I said, I started in the alternative preparation program in 2007 in Clayton County, Georgia. I was 28, I want to say. And at the same time, I enrolled into grad school. And so I was so excited about all the technology that I was learning in the program. And I noticed in my school, I taught at a Title I school, and I noticed that we did not have a lot of technology. We didn't have that interactive board, you know, the smart boards. We didn't have a lot of things. And so I advocated for the teachers and was asking, when can we get this? When can we get that? And then we finally got it, received it. I just went to my principal and was like, look, teachers are walking by my classroom, and I didn't realize they were doing that, but they were walking by my classroom, noticing what I was doing. And me being me, I love to share, you know, I don't want to brag, you know, not a bragger, but I love to share. I love to spread what I know. And I asked my principal, I said, well, can I do some after school workshops or during the staff meetings to provide some type of training? That is taking the initiative. You notice, okay, I don't have training experience. How can I transfer this into corporate? Ask for it at your school. Also, another example that I did, well, training the teachers, the district started to hear about it, and so they started to ask me to do workshops for the entire school district. So I started doing that. But something else that you can do, if you don't feel comfortable asking your principal for experience, most teachers, you're planning with your grade level. So whether you teach 4th grade or 12th grade, you have grade level planning meetings. And if you notice that you found a tool that could be useful for your team because it's useful for you, tell the grade level chairperson, or if you're the grade level chairperson, that you want to use 10, 15 minutes of their planning time and teach them or train them on a tool, whether it's a particular tool called ZipGrade, where you're showing the teachers how to effectively grade all of their assessments just like that by scanning with your phone, or whether you want to teach them some extra tools that you found in Google Classroom. That experience, you trained, you provided resources for those group of teachers, that can go on your resume. You just change the language, and you're not telling a fictional tale, you're telling the truth, but you have to reword it to reflect that you are capable of training, because it's a difference when you're teaching your students, but when you're sitting there in your grade level planning meeting, training those teachers, you're switching from pedagogy to andragogy. And so there you're training based on the needs of adults. You can use that experience and place it on your resume. And the last part, so just a little bit information about me. So like I told you in the beginning, which I almost forgot to tell you, I was a former classroom teacher. Now I'm a corporate instructional designer and an IDOS Courses Academy coach. And one thing I do want to say is that I've met quite a few instructional designers on LinkedIn who have been in the industry for years. And they never, the ones that I met, never refer to themselves as experts. They're always learning. And that's how I felt when I was in the classroom. Even though, you know, you had little titles as grade level chairperson, or you're getting these opportunities to train for the district, I never looked at myself as an expert. I am a lifelong learner. So when I'm receiving feedback from some of you in the academy, I'm learning from you. I'm like, wow, this is a really great portfolio asset. And it gives me ideas on how I can be better. So I would say sometimes I'm not as creative as I would like to be, and then some days I am, but we all get inspiration from each other. So not an expert at all. Actually, I still have goals. Like where I am now is not where I plan to sit in my position. And so I'm just constantly learning from you all. Like Dr. Robin Sargent says, she's learning from us too. So I just think this is just a wonderful academy. If you have any questions or you want to link with me on LinkedIn. There's my link there under Tandi Vaughn, or you can find me on you might see my full name, Tandi, on there. But it was just a pleasure taking some of my time and you taking out your time to listen to me ramble on. But I hope a little bit of this information was able to stick with you and was useful. Let's see if there's any questions. Let me move this screen. I see 6 in the chat. Let's see, I'm sorry. Good. Yep, that's right, Robin. And Dr. Robin is the expert. I don't care what she says, she's the expert, and she provides so much inspiration. So I'm still trying to figure out the whole STAND model. So I like that you put that this is getting your prototypes in front of learners ASAP. So if you are by yourself, you can use a smaller version of this model, and that's what I'm demonstrating in the coaching call. Okay, good. That was what I was wondering, if I could still use that. Okay, great. Thank you, Dr. Robin. And thanks, Tandi. This was great. It really helps ID things make sense by correlating it with what we know as teachers. Yeah, that's right, Adam. No jobs exist without you guys. And I just think that teachers rock. And thank you all so much. Dr. Robin, do you think we can, since we decided not to do a workbook, I can create one quickly, or maybe we can provide this presentation as a PDF. But whether she decides, if she decides a workbook, I can do that in no time. Okay, so she said absolutely we can do a PDF. So that is all for me today. I hope I didn't ramble on. I'm a talker, I'm very shy, but once I get going, I don't shut up. So, but if you have any questions, contact myself or any of the coaches and the mentors and Dr. Robin Sargent. She's just awesome. Everyone has just been awesome. I come to Robin with all of my decisions. I think she might think I'm crazy. When I first started, I had a few interviews, and I was trying to figure out which job I want. And you know, ID, for some of us, it's like a walk in the park. For me, I had to transition. I had to get my mindset changed from all these days off in education to very little days off. But now that we're remote, and most people are remote, you won't notice the difference. But guys, it was wonderful. I hope you all have a beautiful weekend. Enjoy your Friday, and this weekend, take some time out for you. And like Robin says, use a few minutes each day to try and create something for your portfolio. That's what I'm doing. So I'm planning on scrubbing my portfolio clean. So what I have there now won't be there in the next month or so. That's a goal of mine. Let's see if I can get it. But thank you all so very much, and thank you for watching, and I'll see you all soon. Dr. Robin Sargent will have this presentation in a PDF format for you all to access. Have a great day. Bye.